Welcome to another deep dive.
Mhm.
Today we're going to be exploring a topic that I think a lot of people are fascinated by and maybe a little bit afraid of too.
Oh, yeah.
Dark psychology.
Yeah, definitely.
Specifically, we're going to be zeroing in on the manipulation and persuasion tactics that we see all around us
Worry
every single day,
all the time.
whether we realize it or not.
Mm-hmm.
Our guide for this deep dive is Dark Psychology Secrets by Daniel James Hollins.
Great book.
And our mission, I think, is to equip you, the listener, with the knowledge to identify and navigate these tactics in your own life.
That's right. Give you kind of a secret decoder ring for human behavior.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
So let's start by just defining what dark psychology is, because it is kind of a loaded term.
Yeah.
I think it sounds kind of scary.
It can be.
What are we really talking about when we say dark psychology?
Well, the book really emphasizes that dark psychology is about recognizing the potential for predatory behavior in all of us.
Okay.
It's not about labeling anyone as good or evil, but understanding this whole range of human behavior.
So it's not just about, the Ted Bundys and the Jeffrey Dahmers of the world.
Right.
It's about the everyday ways that we might be using these tactics without even realizing it.
Exactly. Hollins uses this term, the dark continuum, to kind of illustrate this.
Mm-hmm.
And, he puts those extreme examples,
Like the Dahmers.
the Bundys,
Yeah.
on one end of the continuum, but it stretches all the way to behaviors that we might consider normal
Oh,
or even acceptable in certain situations.
that is kind of unsettling, isn't it?
It is.
To think that we all have that capacity within us.
I think that's one of the things that makes this topic so fascinating
Yeah.
and so potentially disturbing,
Right.
right? But the book isn't meant to scare you.
Okay.
It's meant to empower you.
Right.
And one way it does that is by highlighting how dark psychology plays out on a societal level.
Okay, yeah, and that's one of the things that I found really interesting in the book was this discussion of the media as a tool for persuasion.
Yeah.
Because I think we all know that the media tries to influence us
Oh, of course.
in various ways, but he breaks it down in a way that made me see it in a whole new light.
Absolutely. And I think one of the key terms he uses is this idea of problem reaction solution.
Okay.
It's this idea that, those in power might manufacture crises
Oh, wow.
to control the narrative and manipulate public opinion.
Can you give me an example of that? Because that sounds a little, I don't know, conspiracy theory-ish.
Sure. Take the rise of fear-mongering around urban violence.
Okay.
Right. The media might disproportionately highlight certain incidents,
Okay.
creating this climate of fear that makes the public more willing to accept, increased surveillance or stricter law enforcement measures.
Even if those measures infringe on personal liberties.
Exactly.
Wow, so they create the problem,
Mm-hmm.
they amplify the problem, and then they offer a solution.
That benefits them.
That benefits them.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
That is pretty sneaky.
And it can happen subtly, too.
Yeah. Hollins talks about this idea of the gradation of changes,
Okay.
which is the idea that if you shift norms gradually,
Right.
it makes it harder for people to even notice that they're being manipulated.
It's like the frog in boiling water.
Exactly.
Oh, that's a disturbing thought. So it's not just about controlling what we think, but it's about controlling what we consider normal.
Yeah, it's about shifting the Overton window,
Oh, wow.
right? The range of acceptable ideas in public discourse.
Okay.
So subtly that we don't even realize it's happening.
So we really need to be vigilant about questioning the information that we're being fed
Absolutely.
and paying attention to those subtle shifts in what's considered acceptable.
Yeah, awareness is the first step
Right.
towards resisting manipulation.
Okay.
And it's not just about the information itself, but how it's presented.
Okay.
Hollins argues that another way to manipulate people is to treat them as if they're incapable of critical thinking.
Oh, like how advertising often uses really simplistic language and imagery.
Yeah,
It almost seems targeted at children sometimes.
exactly. It's about discouraging critical thinking
Okay.
and promoting a more passive acceptance of the message.
That's so interesting because I never really thought about it that way. I just figured they were trying to make their ads catchy
Right.
or memorable. But you're saying it's actually a deliberate strategy to discourage us from thinking too deeply.
That's what Hollins suggests.
Wow.
And he argues that limiting access to quality education can further this goal,
Okay.
right? By widening the gap between social classes and solidifying the power of those in control.
So they're creating a system where people are less likely to question authority or challenge the status quo.
Exactly.
That's a sobering thought.
It is. And then there's the tactic Hollins calls give resistance a bad conscience,
Okay.
which is this idea of shifting the blame for systemic failings onto individuals.
Like how we often hear people blaming the poor for their poverty
Exactly.
or the unemployed for their lack of jobs.
Right. It's a way of making people feel responsible for problems that are actually rooted in, larger social and economic systems.
So it creates self-doubt,
Mm-hmm.
which prevents people from, challenging the system itself.
Exactly.
So it's like a double whammy.
Right.
They control the narrative, and then they make you feel bad for even questioning it.
And remember, those in power often have more information about us than we have about them. Data is a powerful tool in this game of manipulation.
So not only are they shaping the narrative, but they're using data to target us
Right.
with very specific messages designed to, push our button.
Exactly.
So that's all pretty overt, at least on a societal level.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the manipulation that happens in our everyday lives?
Right.
Like in our relationships, in our workplaces?
Yeah, the more covert manipulation.
Yeah, the stuff that flies under the radar.
Yeah, exactly. Things like neurolinguistic programming or NLP.
Okay.
And pickup artist techniques or PUA. These are methods that can be used to subtly persuade and direct others without them even realizing what's happening.
Okay, yeah, this is where things get really interesting and a little bit scary, to be honest.
Yeah.
So tell me more about those tactics.
Well, let's start with NLP.
Okay.
It's actually a fascinating field that explores the connection between language, thought patterns, and behavior.
Right.
But Hollins cautions that, while NLP can be used for self-improvement,
Okay.
it can also be used for manipulation.
It's like any tool, right?
Yeah.
You can be used for good or evil.
Exactly. Hollins talks about how tactics like constantly interrupting someone,
Right.
controlling the flow of the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
or using misdirection
Okay.
can be used to undermine someone's confidence and manipulate them into kind of a more submissive state.
It's like they're subtly hijacking the conversation to get what they want.
Exactly. And the scary part is most people don't even realize it's happening.
So how do we defend ourselves against this kind of stuff?
Well, awareness is key, right?
Oh.
Once you know these tactics exist,
Yeah.
you can start to spot them in real time, and then you can choose how to respond.
So it's not about becoming paranoid.
No.
It's just about being more mindful
Exactly.
of how language is being used to influence us.
Yeah. And don't be afraid to call people out on their manipulative behavior.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes simply pointing it out
Right.
can be enough to disrupt their tactics.
Like shining a light on the cockroach.
Exactly.
Makes it scurry away.
Now let's talk about pickup artist techniques, or PUA.
Okay.
This one's a bit controversial.
Yeah, I can see why. I mean, on the surface, it's just about improving your dating game, right?
Right.
But I've heard some pretty creepy stories about guys using PUA to manipulate women.
And that's the thing,
Yeah.
while some people might see PUA as harmless flirting,
Right.
Hollins argues that some of its techniques exploit psychological knowledge for dominance and control, which can be incredibly problematic.
So they're using psychology as a weapon to
Right.
get what they want, regardless of the other person's feelings.
Exactly. And even if they're not being intentionally malicious,
Right.
that kind of power imbalance can create really unhealthy dynamics in relationships.
It's interesting because I think a lot of people are drawn to PUA because they're looking for like a quick fix for their dating woes.
Sure.
Like they want a formula
Right.
for success.
And that's exactly what PUA promises.
Yeah.
But true connection isn't about formulas or techniques.
Right.
It's about authenticity and vulnerability.
It's about treating people with respect,
Exactly.
not seeing them as targets to be conquered.
Yeah. And that brings us to the heart of the ethical dilemma surrounding both NLP and PUA.
Okay.
This question of intent.
Right.
Are you using these techniques to genuinely connect with someone? Or are you using them to get what you want regardless of their feelings?
It's a question we should all be asking ourselves.
Absolutely.
Not just in the context of dating, but in all of our interactions.
In all of our interactions. Yeah. Because awareness of these tactics is just the first step.
Right.
The real challenge is using this knowledge ethically and responsibly.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've covered NLP and PUA, which are both fascinating, and I have to admit, a little bit unnerving.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about hypnosis,
Oh, yeah.
because it seems like it's often portrayed as this mysterious, almost mystical force.
It does have a bit of a mystique about it,
Yeah.
thanks in part to how it's depicted in pop culture.
Right, like those stage hypnotists who make people cluck like chicken.
Exactly. But Hollins makes it very clear that Stage hypnosis
Uh-huh.
is primarily for entertainment,
Okay.
relies heavily on audience suggestibility,
Okay.
the showmanship of the hypnotist.
So those people are choosing to go along with it.
Right.
It's not like they're being forced to do those things.
They're not going to do anything that goes against their morals or value.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better.
Yeah.
But what about the other types of hypnosis, like the kind that's used in therapy?
Sure. So Holland's touches on the four main types.
Okay.
Traditional,
Like what?
Ericksonian,
Okay.
NLP-based, and self-hypnosis.
Got it.
And they all rely on these hypnotic induction techniques
Okay.
to induce a trance-like state.
So it's more about accessing the subconscious mind
Exactly.
than it is about, swinging a pocket watch and saying, you were getting sleepy.
Although some hypnotists still use that imagery,
Right.
the goal is to bypass the conscious mind
Uh-huh.
and influence thoughts and behaviors at a deeper level.
And that can be used for good, right?
Yeah.
Like helping people overcome fears
Yeah, absolutely.
or break bad habits.
Hypnotherapy has been shown to be effective for a wide range of issues,
Okay.
from anxiety and depression to smoking cessation and weight loss.
But I imagine it could also be used for less ethical purposes.
Of course, like any powerful tool,
Right.
it all comes down to the intent of the person using it. A skilled hypnotist could potentially use these techniques to manipulate someone's thoughts and behaviors without their consent.
That's a big creepy, isn't it?
It is a legitimate concern.
To think that someone could be messing with your mind without you even knowing it.
Right.
But these are very specific techniques.
They are.
They require training and skill.
Yes.
It's not something that can be done easily or casually.
No, not at all.
Okay, that's reassuring. Now let's talk about something that might be even more subtle. Subliminal messaging.
Okay.
I remember hearing about this as a kid.
Yeah.
Like hidden messages in advertising
All right.
that make you want to buy things.
Yeah.
Is there any truth to that?
Subliminal messaging has been a topic of debate for decades,
Okay.
right? And it's this idea that you can influence someone's behavior by exposing them to messages below their conscious awareness.
So you wouldn't even know you were being influenced.
Right. It could be a visual message flashed quickly on a screen,
Okay.
or an audio message embedded in a song or another recording.
Is there any evidence that it actually works?
The research is mixed.
Okay.
Some studies have shown that subliminal messages can have a small impact on behavior, but others have found no effect at all.
Okay.
And even when there is an effect, it's usually very short-lived.
So probably not as effective as some people claim.
Probably not.
But even if the effects are minimal,
Mm-hmm.
the ethical implications are still worth considering.
Absolutely.
Because if you're able to influence someone's behavior
Mm-hmm.
without their knowledge or consent,
Right.
you're essentially bypassing their free will, even if it's just to get them to buy a certain brand of soda.
Yeah.
It's still kind of messed up, isn't it?
It definitely raises some ethical questions.
Okay, so we've talked about how people can be manipulated through, sneaky language and hidden messages,
Right.
and even hypnosis.
Hmm.
But what about persuasion in general?
Yeah.
Is all persuasion manipulative?
That's a great question.
It's kind of a blurry line, isn't it?
It can be the out. Hollands defines persuasion as a symbolic process aimed at changing attitudes and behaviors in an atmosphere of free choice.
So it's about influence, not coercion.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's about presenting information and arguments
Uh-huh.
in a way that encourages someone to come to their own conclusions,
Right.
not forcing them to do something against their will.
But isn't there a fine line between persuasion and manipulation?
There's definitely a gray area,
Yeah.
and the line can be blurry.
I mean, even a good salesperson is using techniques to influence your buying decision.
Sure.
Right.
I think the key distinction lies in the intent and the transparency
Okay.
of the communication.
So if you're being upfront about your goals
Mm-hmm.
and giving the other person all the information they need
Right.
to make an informed decision, it's more likely to be considered ethical persuasion.
Exactly. And that's something that I think we all need to be very mindful of
Yeah.
in today's world,
Especially in today's world.
where we're bombarded with persuasive messages constantly.
Everywhere you look, there's someone trying to sell you something,
Right.
whether it's a product or a service
Mm-hmm.
or a political candidate.
A way of thinking.
Yeah, a particular way of thinking.
Absolutely. It's overwhelming.
It is. And the sheer volume and speed at which these messages travel
Right.
makes it even harder to discern
Uh-huh.
what's true and what's not,
What's genuine?
what's genuine and what's manipulative.
So how do we navigate this minefield
Right.
of persuasive messages
Yeah.
without becoming completely cynical or paranoid?
Well, I think the first step is simply being aware of the different persuasion techniques that are out there.
So knowledge is power.
It really is in this case.
Once you know what to look for,
Mm-hmm.
you can start to see through the smoke and mirrors.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about some specific techniques.
Okay.
I'm really curious to know how these things work in practice.
Sure. Let's start with a classic.
Okay.
Creating a need.
This is where the persuader tries to convince you that you need something
Right.
that you didn't even know you needed before.
Oh, I know this one.
Yeah.
Like those commercials that make you feel inadequate
Exactly.
if you don't have the latest gadget or the
Right.
trendiest clothes.
They're tapping into our deep-seated desires for security,
Right.
belonging, status, and self-esteem.
They're playing on our insecurities,
They are.
making us feel like we're lacking something
Mm-hmm.
that their product can magically fix.
Exactly.
And it can be very effective,
It can,
especially if you're not aware of the tactic being used.
especially if you're not aware.
Okay, so be wary of those ads that make you feel like you're not good enough
Mm-hmm.
without their product. What else should we watch out for?
Another common technique is the foot in the door approach.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of this.
Yeah, this is where the persuader gets you to agree to a small request first,
Uh-huh.
and then gradually escalates to larger requests.
I've heard of this. It's like the classic example of, getting someone to sign a petition
Right.
and then later asking them to donate money to the cause.
Exactly.
Yeah.
By getting that initial agreement,
Uh-huh.
you're much more likely to comply with subsequent requests,
Even if they're much bigger.
even if they're much bigger.
Wow, so it's like they're slowly reeling you in,
Exactly.
getting you to commit more and more
Mm-hmm.
until you're fully invested.
It plays on our desire to be consistent with our past actions
Oh, okay.
and commitments.
Okay, so be careful about those seemingly harmless initial requests.
Yes.
They could be a gateway to something much bigger. What else?
Well, then there's the opposite approach,
Okay.
what Hollins calls go big and then small.
Okay.
It's a bit counterintuitive, but it can be very effective.
I'm intrigued. How does that work?
So the persuader starts with an outrageously large request.
Okay.
'Cause you're almost guaranteed to refuse.
Ugh.
And then they follow up with a smaller,
Okay.
more reasonable request. Okay.
Which seems like a concession on their part.
So like asking for $1 million knowing you'll say no.
Exactly.
And then asking for $100,
Right.
which suddenly seems much more reasonable.
Exactly.
Wow.
And because it seems like they're compromising,
Uh-huh.
you're more likely to feel obligated to agree to the smaller request.
It's playing on our sense of reciprocity,
It is.
right? Like
Well-
we owe them something because they backed down from their initial demand.
Exactly. And that sense of obligation can be a powerful motivator.
Okay, so don't be fooled by those seemingly generous concessions.
Right.
They could be part of a larger strategy to
Exactly.
manipulate you.
Mm.
What other techniques should we be aware of?
Well, one that's closely related to reciprocity
Okay.
is what Hollins calls the anchor point tactic.
Okay.
This is about setting an initial reference point,
Okay.
often a high one,
Uh-huh.
to influence subsequent offers and decisions.
So if you're negotiating a salary, the first number you throw out there, even if it's unrealistic,
Can set the tone for the whole negotiation.
it can. It's like dropping an anchor that pulls all the other offers toward it.
So be strategic about your opening move.
Absolutely.
It could make a big difference in the outcome.
It really could.
Okay, and finally, there's the ever-popular scarcity principle.
Yes,
This one's pretty straightforward.
it is.
We all tend to want things more when they're perceived as scarce
Right.
or in limited supply.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah, like those limited time offers
Mm-hmm.
and exclusive deals that make you feel like you have to act now
Right.
or miss out.
It plays on our fear of missing out,
Yeah.
our desire to have what others can't have.
So be wary of those marketing messages that create a sense of urgency or exclusivity.
Absolutely.
They could be playing on your primal instincts.
They are.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here
We have.
with these different persuasion methods.
Yeah.
From creating a need to leveraging scarcity.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a crash course in the psychology of influence.
It is.
But it seems like we need to be constantly on guard,
Right.
analyzing every message
Mm-hmm.
and every interaction
Yeah.
to avoid being manipulated. Is there a way to simplify this?
I wouldn't say it's about being constantly on guard,
Okay.
but rather about developing a healthy skepticism
Okay.
and a critical eye.
So not about being paranoid,
No.
but just being more mindful
Exactly.
of how we're being influenced.
And it's important to remember that not all persuasion is inherently bad,
Okay.
right? It's a fundamental part of human interaction.
We need to be able to persuade and be persuaded
We do.
to function in society.
To function in society.
Yeah.
The key is to be aware of the techniques being used.
Okay.
And to make sure that they're being used ethically and responsibly.
But there's one area where deception seems to be much more prevalent.
Okay.
And that's in psychology research itself.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah. And this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Because it raises some serious ethical dilemmas. Hollins uses the case of Diederik Stapel,
Okay.
a Dutch psychologist who was caught fabricating data
Wow.
to illustrate this problem.
Okay.
Stapel was a rising star, publishing prolifically, winning awards. But it turns out much of his research was based on lies.
Oh, wow.
His students eventually noticed inconsistencies,
Okay.
and an investigation revealed he had fabricated data
Wow.
for dozens of his papers.
That's a massive scandal.
It is a massive scandal.
I-
But is it a one-off?
Right?
Or is this type of deception more common in research than we'd like to think?
That's the disturbing part.
Yeah.
Hollins suggests that deception has become normalized in psychology research.
Wow.
To a certain extent.
Okay, so researchers might mislead participants
Right.
about a study's true purpose.
Mm-hmm.
They might withhold information
Yeah.
or even manipulate them in various ways.
The argument is that sometimes deception is necessary to get accurate results. If participants know the true purpose of the study, it could bias their behavior.
It's that classic dilemma.
Yeah.
The ends justify the means.
Exactly. But is it ethical to deceive people,
Right.
even if it's for the sake of scientific progress?
That's a tough one.
It is a tough one. The American Psychological Association,
Uh-huh.
they do have guidelines for when deception is considered justifiable,
Okay.
and they say it should only be used if the study has significant scientific value
Okay.
and if non-deceptive alternatives
Right.
aren't feasible.
But even with guidelines, there's still the concern that deception erodes the trust
Absolutely.
between science and the community.
It does.
You know, if people believe that scientists are routinely deceiving them,
Right.
it could damage the credibility of science as a whole.
Yeah, it's a valid concern.
And it makes you wonder about the impact on psychology students
Mm-hmm.
who are constantly exposed to deception
Right.
in their studies.
In their studies, yeah.
Could it desensitize them to dishonesty?
Mm.
Make them more likely to accept it? In other areas of life,
It's a question worth pondering.
it is.
Yeah.
It really is. And it brings us back to this idea that knowledge of dark psychology is a double-edged sword.
Absolutely.
We've spent a lot of time talking about how people manipulate and persuade others.
Yeah.
But what about breaking free
Right.
from those patterns ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
How do we reclaim our power
Yeah.
and live more authentically?
So I think this is where we shift
Okay.
from understanding manipulation
Okay.
to empowering ourselves.
I like that. Let's dive into that. Give us some tools to break free.
All right. So Holland starts by emphasizing the importance of recognizing patterns
Okay.
in our own lives.
Okay.
Right. We often get stuck in routines and predictable behaviors that can limit our freedom.
Okay. And manipulators can use those patterns against us.
Exactly. If they know how you'll react,
Right.
they can predict and control your behavior.
So be less predictable.
Right.
Be less controllable.
Mm-hmm. Keep you guessing. But sometimes it's not just external patterns. It's internal ones.
Yeah.
Our own thoughts and beliefs that hold us back.
Right. He talks about the need to overcome guilt and self-doubt.
Yes, those are often the weapons that manipulators use
Okay.
to keep us under their thumb,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mhm.
They make us feel like we owe them something
Uh-huh.
or that we're not good enough to stand up for ourselves.
So how do we combat that?
Well, Holland suggests a radical shift in perspective.
Okay.
Recognize that you don't owe anyone anything
Wow.
and that you deserve to prioritize your own well-being and happiness.
It's about letting go of that need for external validation
Exactly.
and trusting your own intuition.
And that leads to his next point.
Okay.
Taking action without permission.
Okay.
We're so conditioned to wait for approval,
Right.
to seek permission before pursuing our goals.
It's like we're still waiting for our parents to give us the okay.
Exactly. But Holland says we need to break free from that.
Oh.
Challenge that ingrained habit and pursue your dreams without seeking external validation.
It's about taking ownership of our lives
Yes.
and not letting fear or self-doubt hold us back.
It's about betting on yourself.
Yeah.
Trust your gut, prioritize internal happiness,
Mm-hmm.
and take calculated risks to achieve personal fulfillment.
That's great advice for personal empowerment. But what about those toxic relationships that are already draining our energy?
Right.
How do we let go of those?
So Hollins offers some very specific advice for dealing with manipulative relationships.
Okay.
And he starts with recognizing the cycle of love bombing.
Love bombing.
Was
Yeah.
that. So it's when someone showers you with attention and affection and gifts
Right.
early on to create this like really intense bond
Wow.
and a sense of dependency.
So you get hooked on that feeling of being adored
Yes.
and want it. Okay.
And then they start to withdraw that affection, leaving you feeling insecure and desperate to get it back.
So they're giving you just enough to
Right.
keep you hooked,
Exactly.
but not enough to satisfy you.
Right, and that's where the intermittent reinforcement comes in.
Okay.
They'll throw you a bone every now and then,
Right.
just to keep you hoping that things will go back to the way they were.
It's a classic manipulation tactic.
It is.
Keep you off balance and wanting more.
Exactly.
So how do you break free from that?
Well, Hollins suggests setting firm boundaries without announcing them.
Without announcing them. Why?
Because manipulators are experts at twisting words
Right.
and turning things around,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They'll try to convince you that you're being unreasonable
Okay.
or that you're misinterpreting their actions.
So it's better to just start creating distance
Exactly.
without getting into a big debate about it.
Yeah, gradually reduce contact,
Okay.
limit interactions, don't give them the opportunity to manipulate you further.
So he's also advising against confronting them directly.
Yeah, confrontation just feeds into their narrative. Right.
It gives them the opportunity to play the victim or deny their behavior.
It's like trying to argue with a brick wall.
Exactly. You're not going to get anywhere.
Okay.
So prioritize disengagement and exit.
Okay.
Cut your losses and walk away.
But isn't it easy to fall into the trap of self-blame after a toxic relationship?
Oh, absolutely.
Like you start thinking it's all your fault?
It's easy to blame yourself for everything that went wrong.
Right.
But Hollins reminds us that, relationships are a two-way street.
Right.
You don't need to shoulder the entire burden of blame.
So cut contact, resist self-blame,
Yes,
and build a support system to help you through the process.
exactly. Having supportive friends and family can make a huge difference
Yeah.
in navigating those challenges.
Wow. We've covered so much ground in this deep dive.
We have.
From understanding, these tactics of manipulation to breaking free
Yeah.
from those patterns, it's been quite a journey.
It's been a fascinating exploration of the human mind.
Its potential for both darkness and light.
And as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm curious to hear what's resonating most with you, the listener.
Yeah, what insights have you gained that you can apply to your own life?
What tactics have you encountered that you might now be able to see through and deflect?
And how can you use this knowledge to become a more empowered and ethical communicator?
These are all questions I encourage you to reflect on as we move into the final part of our deep dive into the world of dark psychology. So we've spent a lot of time talking about how to spot these manipulative tactics, how to break free from them.
Yeah.
But we even touched on how some of these techniques, when used ethically, can actually be,
Right.
helpful in our everyday lives.
Absolutely.
But I think there's another layer we need to explore here.
I agree.
We focus a lot on the how of dark psychology, but what about the why?
Yeah.
Like, what motivates people to use these tactics in the first place?
Right. What's driving that behavior?
Yeah. Is it always a conscious choice?
Yeah.
Or are there deeper psychological factors at play?
Well, Hollins suggests that insecurity
Okay.
is one of the main drivers of manipulative behavior.
That makes sense. People who feel insecure or inadequate might try to control others to feel more powerful.
Exactly. They might use manipulation to compensate for those feelings of inadequacy,
Right.
to create a sense of control in their lives.
It's like they're building a facade to hide their vulnerabilities.
And that facade can be very convincing,
Yeah.
especially if you're not aware of what's going on beneath the surface.
So how do you spot someone who might be using manipulation to mask their insecurity?
Well, one telltale sign is a constant need for validation.
Okay.
Right? They might fish for compliments,
Right.
try to one-up others, or be overly sensitive to criticism.
It's like they're constantly seeking reassurance that they're good enough, smart enough, successful enough.
Exactly. And because their sense of self-worth is so fragile,
Right.
they resort to manipulation to try to prop it up.
Wow. And another common driver of manipulation is a lack of empathy.
Absolutely. People who lack empathy have difficulty understanding or caring about the feelings of others.
So they might not even realize they're hurting someone
Right.
with their manipulative behavior.
Or they might simply not care.
And that lack of empathy can make them incredibly effective manipulators.
It can because they're not held back by those same moral constraints.
Right. It's chilling to think that someone could be so detached from the emotional impact of their actions.
It is, but it's important to remember that even if someone is lacking in empathy,
Right.
it doesn't excuse their behavior.
Right. We're all responsible for our own choices and actions.
Yes, are.
And, understanding the why behind manipulative behavior can help us to respond with more compassion and awareness. So it's not about condoning their behavior, but it's about understanding the root cause so we can set boundaries and protect ourselves more effectively.
Exactly.
This deep dive has been quite a journey. We've explored the dark side of human psychology. We've unpacked these tactics of manipulation.
Yeah,
And we've even learned how to use some of these insights for good.
absolutely.
They've been a fascinating exploration
It has,
of the complexities of human behavior.
for sure.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to circle back to this idea that knowledge of dark psychology is a double-edged sword.
It is.
It can be used to manipulate and control,
Mm-hmm.
or it could be used to empower and enlighten.
Right.
So how do we ensure that we're using this knowledge ethically?
Yeah.
How do we avoid becoming the very manipulators we're trying to protect ourselves from?
That's the ultimate challenge, isn't it?
It is.
And I think the answer lies in cultivating self-awareness,
Okay.
empathy, and a commitment to ethical behavior.
So it's about using this knowledge to empower ourselves and others,
Yeah.
not to exploit or control them.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing that true connection and influence come from a place of authenticity and respect, not from manipulation and deception.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful message to end on.
It is.
Yeah.
This deep dive has given us a lot to think about,
It has.
and I hope it's empowered you, the listener, to navigate the complexities of human interaction
Yeah,
with greater awareness, discernment, and integrity.
I hope so too.
Thanks for joining us on this exploration of dark psychology.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you found it insightful and empowering.
Absolutely.
And until next time, keep diving deeper into the mysteries of the human mind.